know that he is a lecturer, you know that he's a teacher and an author, and has served in many other important capacities. But more important than that, in my opinion, I think those are all important. But more important than that, in my associations with Dr. Nash, I can remember having breakfast in Detroit with him a few years ago, and coming in contact with him on other occasions, and being with him here today. I'd like to say that Dr. Nash is the type of person that you enjoy eating breakfast with. He's the type of person that you like to ride out to the radio station with. He's the type of person that you like to sit here at the speaker's table with and just sit down and talk naturally. What I'm trying to say is this, that he is the leader in our field, and by that I mean the fields of health, physical education, recreation, has made great contribution. And in addition to that, he's just a fine person, Dr. J.B. Nash.
Thank you, Bob. That's very gracious of you. I understand there's going to be some discussion and square dancing, a party, and a few other things. So I'm not going to make the error that one of my friends did from a small institution in New Haven. I think there's a college there. I forget its name right now, but I think he was up in the vicinity of Harvard, was anxious to make a very good impression, talking to a group of boys, and so he took the word Yale down and letters down, and took Y stands for youth, and he spent 40 minutes on it. He got over to A stands for ability, and he took another 35. L stood for learning, and he took 40 more. E stood for efficiency, and he took 35 more. Finally ended up with a great emotional swing of his arms, and he said, "Boys, I'm glad I'm from Yale." Proverbial little boy in the back of the room said, "Mister, so are we. We're certainly glad you're not from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology." I was talking to Mr. Harper here about eating and speaking, and I had lunch with President Angel just, I guess almost within 10 days before the time of his death, after he retired from Yale. He was telling us at the meeting about their banquet they gave him when he left Yale. Began about this time in the evening, and they kept on to about 11 o'clock, telling everything he could have done, should have done, might have done, did do. And then along about 11:30, they called on him. He said there wasn't a single thing he could say. He talked about everything, but he did say, he got up and he said, "My good friends, you've said everything. There's just one thing for good old Yale I've done that nobody has mentioned. As president, I have eaten 3,472 chickens. And if I had been president of Yale, I would have added 3,492 a la king." Now our program chairman's gone, hasn't she? I was down in Oklahoma the other day, and they were telling me about a big Rotary Club down there. I was speaking at the Rotary Club in Tulsa, telling there about a man from New York who's been speaking, and he watched a man coming up along the side here with a lariat toward the speaker's table. Reached over to the presiding officer and said, "Have I said something wrong? Have I done anything wrong here?" He said, "No, sir." He said, "We take care of our guests in Oklahoma." A little bit later, saw this man coming up there with 2 guns in his hand. Looking over there, he said, "I must have said something." And he said, "No, sir." He said, "We take care of our guests in Oklahoma. They're after the program chairman." said to you today that it's always a little strange to be introduced from New York, a city of nightclubs and day beds. I heard a good definition of a nightclub the other day. It was a place where the tables are reserved but the patrons aren't. Well, I just got one more story. It has no connection. I can't work it in, so I got to tell you about the story they were telling down at the conference there about this man coming out of the munition plant or a research plant. Came out with going home that evening with a wheelbarrow with sawdust in it. The man knew that he was got something hidden in the sawdust, searched through it, couldn't find a thing. Well, next night he came back with another load of sawdust. He knew something must be wrong. He took a sample of it over, and they put Geiger points on it and everything else, but couldn't find a thing. And there's everybody working on it. About the fifth night, he said, well, my brother, I give up. We got everything. We put all the research on this. We can't find a single thing that you're stealing. Now, he said, just as man to man, I'm not going to do anything about it, but curiosity's aroused. What in the world are you stealing? He said, wheelbarrow. Now, tonight I want to, as leaders here, talk with you. Something is pretty close to my heart, and I'm going to feel with you rather than even talk or think with you. And that is about the place and the necessity of skill learning in education. I would like to define skills much larger than mere neuromuscular skills on a tennis racket or a baseball bat or a piece of pottery or handcraft. I would like eventually to think of skills in thinking. And I believe that a great deal of skill in thinking is based upon experience. Of course, that's John Dewey, Patrick's thesis that we think in terms of our experience. And the wide range of experience is basic to thinking. And you're all familiar, undoubtedly, with the work of Allison Davis in Chicago, Psychology, in which he has almost, at least fully in the minds of some people, knocked the whole theory of the IQ into a cocked hat. His work was given about a year ago, you remember, at the American Association of School Administrators in St. Louis. He has come to the conclusion, for example, that the IQ is much more a test of vocabulary, much more a test of the social level of the home than it is of IQ. And you remember what he did? Instead of taking words that were rather unique, such as symphony, and I can't remember all of them now, he substituted very simple words of the street and found that many people who had been failing because they didn't understand words, had not had the background experience, had a very much higher IQ than they had formerly had. In other words, there is a great deal in the social level of the home, or the cultural level of the home, the activity level of the home, which determines an individual's ability to think. But I'm not going to talk on skills in thinking tonight. I think there's also skills in living together, skills in emotions, skills in attitudes. I think we build those skills, and I think the ability to live with people and like people and know people is a skill. And I think we've got to learn skills in democracy, skills in cooperative living, skills in getting along with people. I was terribly disturbed in Los Angeles to see one of the papers in Los Angeles had adopted as a slogan, "We object to the schools using our money to make world citizens out of our children. That hurt me terribly. It hurt me that we were living in a nation where we did not believe in a world state plan. I was in Tulsa, and I found that Gerald Smith, the rabble rouser, was speaking at a convention hall. I went out just to hear him. And his attacks upon UNESCO, violent attacks upon United Nations, as a scheme of mean men over the world to deceive an innocent group of unskilled people like we in America, and that it was a scheme to kill democracy. And the thing that disturbed me even more than that was the applause that he got every time he attacked the United Nations and and UNESCO, or anything that had to do with international or interracial cultural concepts. Well, I think there are skills there. But tonight I want to talk with you a little bit more on the skills that we think of more specifically in the field of recreation and in education. I want to open this up by telling you the result of some work that I just completed this last summer, which took me 20 years. About 20 years ago, in one of my classes, which is rather small for me, for us, a class that would run about 50, which I taught twice a year, with an average age of the undergraduate. In fact, I didn't allow any undergraduates in at all. An average age of probably this room, about 23 or 4. 25, I guess. I was telling the ladies last night, I think I better repeat it for the men, that this young lady found herself out in Reno. And make a long story short, she wanted to know how they gambled, what they did there. I don't know what she was doing in Reno. That isn't part of the story. She stuck her head in there, and they told her. She put her money on a particular number, and then when the thing come around, stopped at that number, she got all the money. She said, well, I can understand that. She said, but what number do I take? They said, well, take the first 2 numbers, your automobile license, your age, or just a hunch. No, she'll take my age. And so she put it on 33, swung it around. Slowly the pin began to come around and stopped on 47, and she fainted. Well, this group were mature people. I've had people in there 75, 80 years of age, and they were some of the youngest people I've ever had in the class, really. Well, what I've done was this. I tried to find out from this group, and this summer I passed the 1,000th person in the list. Now I stopped. I said I was going to go on till I got 1,000. Then we worked and finished it up, the statistics on it. I wanted to find out what your hobby is. What is the main hobby that you might have at this moment? And you. Is there anything that you would say, here's something if I only had time to do it. Here's the thing I'd like to do I'd like to write some poetry. I'd like to make some pottery. I'd like to do this. I'd like to do that. Well, I find in the first place that a great many people have no driving hobby. They're rather vague. And to cover up themselves, many of them say travel. And I inform them immediately that will not qualify. If they want to travel, I'll get them a job as a fuller brush man, and they can travel. They've got to travel with an interest. They've got to see Christopher Wren churches, they've got to go to cathedrals, they've got to visit youth organizations, they've got to study migratory habits of birds, they've got to do something. They can't just travel. Well, to make a long story short, it takes me about a month to dig, threaten. I can't threaten very much because it's the one class in the world, and I'll deny this if you tell my dean, that I tell them when they come in that they're going to get a passing grade. I don't care much about what they do. I tell them I'm not going to call roll. I don't care whether they come or not. It's their money and their time. If they want to waste it, it doesn't make a bit of difference to me. I'll live just as long as they have. As a matter of fact, if I'm judging from the seats that are not vacant, I don't miss many people. They owe me 60 hours, according to university regulations. So I give them back 60 hours. I said, I'm going to present you with 60 hours. You've been wanting to do something for a long while. Here's 60 hours. At the end of this time, I haven't gone into a far country. I'm going to come back and ask you what you did with your talents. And in addition to that, we're going to have you bring your sample of your talents in. And up at the camp, somebody takes sailing. They've got to sail down the cove and back past the classroom. And it's a nasty trick on them because it's the trickiest cove on the whole lake. And there's a calm place in there, and that 9/10 of them get in and get stuck right in the middle of that calm place. But they sailed down. One of them said he was going to play so we could know a tune, and he played Onward Christian Soldier. We recognized it, and he got an A. Anyone who is kind and respectable to the instructor gets an A anyhow. Those who are not kind and charitable toward the instructor get B's. But we have a wonderful time. And in many instances, they put in hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of time doing things, new things. But that's partly off the subject. I try to dig and find out what is your interest. So I do it by saying that tomorrow morning, I'm going to give each one of you people 1 solid year off. I'm going to finance you. You can go anywhere you want to go, do anything you want. You can take any lessons in the world. You can spend it on poetry. You can read. You can do anything in the world. You have to travel alone. You can't dissipate. You can't take your family with you or any prospective family. But you may go anywhere you want and do anything you want. For 1 year. What do you want to do? Well, the interesting thing is that we eventually pull it out of them. After a great deal of dragging. And make them put it on record. We don't tell them why, but make them put it on record. Finally, it's on record. Now we come to the real problem. When did you start that interest? What was the age you first came in contact with that interest? And the person interested in flowers will say, oh, took a botany class in college. Somebody else did something in high school. Somebody else did something else. Well, I said, I'm not satisfied. I want you to write to father, mother, brother, sister, Aunt Susie, Uncle Pete, anybody who knows you, and I want to find out. And letters begin to come back. You goose, you don't remember when you were 4 years of age that Aunt Susie used to take you on bird hikes and on flower trips? And don't you remember that Uncle so-and-so helped you to whittle? And don't you remember that somebody else did so-and-so? Well, now the significant point for me was this. We were able to trace 86% of all those interests to below the age of 12. 62% below the age of 10, and almost 50% of them below the age of 6. Now just you think for a minute. Think of the actors. Helen Hayes acting at 3, Judy Garland at 6. Uta Hagen saw St. Joan at the age of 5 in Berlin. Go to the artists. The biographer of Michelangelo says that his artistry was taken in with his mother's milk. She was an artist. Go to figure skaters, ice skating, golf. Out of the 500 and some professional golfers and par golf players, I circulated them with a letter 4 or 5 years ago. Practically every one of them had carried, with the exception of some boys in the South where the white boy didn't carry. Bobby Jones didn't carry, but he played with his father at that age. You go over to inventors, and you found that they were living in homes where that was the topic of conversation. I took 5 artists of each century, beginning with the 12th century to the 20th, picked them at random, found that practically everyone had been raised in a home where somebody was an exact artisan. Not artist always, but artisan. Might have been a anatomist or one in mechanical drawing or something exact. Well, it brought to me this significant thing, which I believe now to be a fact, that skill interests are laid down much earlier than any of us had ever believed. Tilney, who I think was probably our greatest neurologist, tells us that a behavior pattern or an interest pattern, once laid down in the human organism, is never lost. I've tried it out. I've gone to my class up at camp and told them found out how many have ever walked on stilts. And I find a group here has, group here hasn't. Oh, I said, all right, on the way out from here, there's a pair of stilts over against the big rock. I want a couple of you who walked on stilts 15, 20 years ago, get on. They get right on and start off, do a waltz up the path with the stilts. And then some big, husky, flat-footed football player gets up and says, anybody can do that, give it away. And I say to them, get out of the road, everybody, you'll kill somebody. And he gets up onto that, and one stilt goes this way and one goes that way, and he falls over his back. But to all of his credit, in most instances he says, I'll master that, I'll get that. And so he gets his back up against a big rock and steadies himself and starts. But he has to go through the same learning process that he would have had to gone through if he'd have started at 10. You've got to learn it. It has to get into the nervous system. There has to be a connection in the nervous system there. And for every single connection that has to do with the skills of all those millions of coordinations of the fingers, there is a cortical or an upper spinal cord connection. And yet our neurologist will tell us probably that if some great physician could diagnose the human brain at death, they would find that probably not 1% of his capacity had ever been tapped. Think of Leonardo da Vinci. Artist, sculptor, inventor, discoverer, philosopher, poet. Think of the things he did, and probably didn't exhaust his capacity. Why can't we spread that in skills? Why? Partly because we keep children on too much of a garden variety diet too long. We've got them too long on Mickey Mouse and Minnie Mouse and Pluto and Moo Moo the cow and Wee Wee the pig and the dog and the cat and those types of things, when we ought to be talking about redstarts and black and white warblers and Orion's belt and catalysts and chemical terms and 1,001 types of things. After they've learned, there's no use of keeping on with barnyard cattle, barnyard animals, after they know barnyard animals. And we've kept them on those things so long. And one of the reasons why we don't get them onto other things is because we don't know anything more than barnyard animals. I'll come back to that in a moment. One of the great handicapping things on children is their parents. I tell the story about the boy and his father going up 5th Avenue in a bus. He gets up along 34th Street and he says, Dad, what's this big building? Oh, no, son. Gets up at 42nd and there's the library. I said, Dad, what's that big building? Oh, no, son. Get up around 47th and there's Radio City and St. Patrick's. And what are these big buildings? I don't know, son. Finally, the little boy looks up and he says to his father, you don't mind me asking questions, do you, Dad? The father says, no, how else you going to learn? Well, we've got a We've got a lot of people in just exactly that situation. And the reason they don't learn. Now, therefore, I should like to say that there is, I believe, what I would call a skill learning decade. And if I were forced to pick that skill learning decade, I think I'd pick about 3 to 13, maybe 4 to 14. Now, that doesn't mean the skills will not be learned before and afterwards, but there's a skill learning decade. And I think we have underestimated the capacity of children to do things, all kinds of things, learn all types of skills during that period without fear. They're not worried about raised eyebrows and nudging elbows. And you are, even as young as you are, Miss Nell. And the rest of you here, I won't pick anybody else off the name. We are, and we utilize the law of escape to get away from doing new things into something we already do well. I can draw a confession from every person in this room, if you were honest, and I think most of you would be. I can confess to you that when somebody wants me to do something that I am not particularly good in, I can rationalize, and I can get into the law of escape and get over into something I do pretty well. And you women are past masters at getting a headache when you don't want to do something you don't want to do, and then immediately go out and do something you want to do. You've got us all licked a mile on your techniques. Well, therefore, we begin to get conscious of the other sex. We begin to get conscious of failure, and we don't want to be laughed at and made fun of, and we withdraw, and hence we don't get the wide range of experience which we ought to get. Now I want to make a few applications. According to the late report of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, we have in this country about 91 million jobs. Let's call it 90 million. There was one man who is not in favor today, some of the Washington organizations, who once said we would have 90 million jobs and was laughed at. But we have over 90 million, about 91 million. If we should take all of the professional people, the doctors and the dentists, the engineers and the lawyers, all of the teachers and all of the nurses, we would only have a little less than 6% of that group. Call it 6 million, a little under that. And that gives us left 54 million people now in our public schools who will eventually occupy these jobs. 54 million people who are not going to be particularly benefited by the average school program of America. So I know you've got mechanical drawing, and I know you've got dramatics, and I know you have music, and I know you have sports and games, but in the minds of a great many children, they don't count. I have a 13-year-old boy coming home with his report card, and I look at music, yay, and I look at physical education, and I look at typing, and I look at Glee Club, and I look at something else. He says they don't count. Bah, nothing. Here's what counts. These get you to college. Science, social studies, mathematics, this. He said those others don't count. He said, I don't care much about them. Nobody does. They're on to us. And these fundamentals that we're stressing, whose are they? Who set forth that mathematics was so-and-so as so important and dramatic art wasn't? Who established them? Well, the colleges. Got to have them to get into college. Got to have them to graduate from high school. Got to happen to be respectable. I'm going to get one of my confessions. I'm going to ask a couple of you before I get through. And you don't try to avoid looking at me because I'm going to call on you. I went through 5 years of higher mathematics. 4 years of higher mathematics and one that led up to it in a special academy where I went out of a 3-year high school, so I took some. But I had 4 years of college mathematics. I think I could trace the position of all the stars at any month or any day for 100 years, and where they were 100 years ago. An awfully practical thing to do, you know. It gave you such a background on how to solve the problem with the Iron Curtain and all the rest of it. But I was pretty proud of the fact that I was good in mathematics, trigonometry, analytical geometry, astronomical geometry, and a few others. I found out when I was trying to help some of the children, my own children, in the 6th grade arithmetic. That's right. From these 84 million people who are going to be running trucks, raising potatoes, grinding flour, pouring in gasoline, working in 5 and 10, selling tickets, what are fundamentals to them in the way they're going to live in this next 30, 40, 50 years? What are the fundamentals? Are there some other fundamentals than we've been thinking about that are real fundamental to them? If so, what are they? And are we giving them to them? Well, I picked this up some time ago. It's an old quotation. Greeting his pupils, the master said, "What would you learn of me?" And the reply from the children came, "How shall we care for our bodies? How shall we rear our children? How shall we work together? How shall we live with our fellow men? How shall we play? And for what ends do we live?" And the teacher pondered these words, and sorrow was in his heart because his learning touched not on these things. I wonder how many of these are really fundamentals comes to these children's lives. Well, I'm trying to say to you that here are 84 million people. Now, these are the people who are going into the doctors and the dental profession, medical, need skills for hobbies too. There's no question about that. But I'm going to write them off for the moment. I'm thinking of these other people who are not going to use these high school courses primarily for basis for a profession. What are they going to need? Where are they going to be? How are they going to spend their leisure time? Shorter hours? Longer vacations? Early retirement? What are they going to do with it? Well, we can turn around and ask, what are they doing with it? Drinking is on the increase tremendously all over this country. As a part of a relief from frustration, I think. I'm probably no judge on why people drink. They must get some satisfaction out of it from the amount of liquor that's consumed. Why have they gone in, as I said this morning, into gambling that has totaled over $20 billion a year? Great deal of it illegal. I saw more liquor flowing around in the state of Oklahoma than I ever have in any state I've ever been. It's the only state I've been in for years where it's illegal. Still flowing. Well, my feeling is that those people are going to have a variety of skills that are going to offset the routinization and the mechanization of the work that's coming. And no question in my own mind but what the work of tomorrow is going to be less satisfying than the work of yesterday. I remember being up in the high Alps at one time some years ago, and my shoes wore out. I just wore them right through to the socks. I had to stop in a little town up there of Kutzall. And I said to him, "I want you to make me a pair of shoes." "Sure, take me about 4 days." We had a little resting to do, and I guess we had a few shoes left, and we could at least hike down the valley, but he finished them. Took about 4 days. I remember going in to get my shoes. And you didn't throw down 90 marks and grab your shoes and run. You had to stop and look at the shoes. You had to hold them up and feel the leather. And you had to pull the instep back and forth. And you looked at the tongue, and you had to say, my, that's good leather. Nice, not nice and soft. Isn't that nicely pegged together? Beautiful job. Lovely thing. And his satisfaction came from the fact that he made a shoe. There it was. And the gleam in his eye as he said, I made it. I made everything. And I was very much interested only a few weeks ago to read Albert Schweitzer's new book on history of Christianity. Christianity and Civilization, I believe is the title. The title slips me. Albert Schweitzer, who is ranked today as one of the great living, great Christians of all times, said in there a statement that I never expected to come from him. And I was so happy it came from him, not from some layperson. But he said, no man can achieve spiritual growth, spiritual heights, until he has mastered. He has to feel confidence in himself. He has to master in certain material things before he can let his whole spiritual life come to the heights of mastery. And he developed in a whole chapter there how one gets confidence in himself, believes in himself, believes in his integrity, and that lays the basis for a spiritual growth and spiritual power. Well, that was a new idea to me. And somehow it seems to me that it is important. Now, let me look ahead now at about 4 applications. That will be all I'll do tonight. Let me lay the application for what we call adult education, or for the education of these older people. I talked to Levine, who has charge of all the older patients in the hospitals of New York City, and is developing adult recreation. Himself a medical man. He said to me, at least 80% of these people should never have been sent to this institution, and 60% should be sent away. If they had anything that they could do that would occupy their time and give them some sense of respect and stature. In other words, this tremendous expansion of neuropsychiatric disorders, this running to psychiatrists and psychologists and all this type of advice, all of this what we call mental condition, ill mental health, I hate that word, but it's used, in many instances, and I would think up to within 90 to 95% of the interest, the only thing those people lack is something significant to do in the world to give them something to live for, and they'd never be there. Just the minute that they lose their drive of something worthwhile to live, they're just like a ship without a rudder. The old dynamic engines in the hold keep pushing along, but there's no rudder. And they've gone to pieces, as Burnham always used to say, in that normal mind of his, which should have been written yesterday, just as fresh yesterday as the day when Burnham wrote it, I guess 50 years ago. In other words, our problem today is to give people something to live for. And just security isn't enough. And just financial income isn't enough. Men don't want security. We want a reasonable amount of security for respectability. But what men want and demand and must have for normality is challenge. They've got to have a challenge. Starts out with a little child playing against the fear of it. Someday I'm going to write a whole pamphlet on it. Now, anybody laughs at me, I'm going to point a finger at him and say, here's a children's game, what is it? What do you mean? You're it first, I'll be it second. Last man in it, first man caught it. What's it? And I'm not talking Broadway it either. Talking Oklahoma it. What is it? Who developed that name? What does it mean? Well, you know, it's got a whole philosophy back of it. And I think maybe it's developed by children. And you know that no adult has ever invented, discovered, or organized a children's game which lasted. We've organized safety games and all kinds of games, and the children just poo-poo at them. They've organized their own games, and they live. Well, adult education, if you're going to have things that will make life worthwhile in these hours that are going to be freed by the mechanical slave. Now I want to say something awfully serious. You're not the people directly to say it to. I say this to high school students. I try to treat high school students as adults. They're tough to talk to, unless you can get out. I talked to 1,800 the other day at the Chaffee Union High School in California, and I sweat blood for the first 15 minutes to get anything, but I think we finally got them. I say to them this, that as a father, which will be 10 years from now, 5 years from now, senior high school people, maybe 2 years from now, one of the things that is going to be very essential for you is the ability to establish leadership with your children. How are you going to do it? You're not going to do it by just talking to them or lecturing to them. You're not going to do it by any verbal method. You're going to establish a contact with those children of yours by doing things with them. I got onto the airplane coming out of San Francisco a few weeks ago, threw in the San Francisco Chronicle to read on the train, and the headlines on the second section was the boy, 16 years of age, 17 maybe, who had just killed the girl in Golden Gate Park. Brutal murder. He was in jail. And the interview there was his father coming to talk to the jail, to talk with him. And the father said to him, son, I didn't know you were running around with a game like that. Son, I didn't know where you were spending your nights. Son, I didn't know you carried a gun. And it went on about 12 questions. And each time he said, I didn't know. I sat there as my plane began to gain height over the high Sierras. I said to myself, why didn't you know? And I just started reading this serial, the Saturday Evening Post, of these three boys who killed this girl in Ann Arbor, high school boys. I just happened to pick up on the train yesterday. I want to read the other 3 chapters. I think you all ought to read all of them. Again, the father kept saying to the boy there, the second boy that was interviewed, he didn't know he was using marijuana. He didn't know where he'd been spending his time at night. He didn't know he'd been running around with this particular girl. I say to you again, why didn't he know? There's a more of a responsibility in raising children than merely to conceive them and bring them into this world. And if you can establish a tie with those children, do things with them, and sometimes it's going to hurt. I want to tell you, I know. I've gone into meteor craters, and I've climbed mountains, and I've gone down into the Grand Canyon on a muleback until I thought my legs would crack off like glass pipe backs. And I've gone out and thrown balls when I would have a lot rather gone up and cocked my feet up on a nice soft chair and read a book. But by golly, I've gone. And we've shoved our boat up over it. He's only 13 now. And we've shoved our boat up to over 3 portages up there in Canada. And sometimes we've got about 4 hauls to get over that portage into the lake where the 5-pound bass jump into our boat. Sometimes. And camped out with wet feet and bread soaked up so we had to fry the crumbs even to make our breakfast. But it went. And I am convinced that if you can keep that contact, mother and daughter and father and daughter, mother and son or father and son, when trouble does come, and it comes to about 1 out of 10, minor trouble, that they'll come home to dad, and come home to mother, and they'll not go down the alley and join the gang and try to find some way to solve that problem. We've got to keep contact. And this tremendous growth in delinquency is because that child has lost his sense of belonging in the home, and in the community, and in the school. This Harvard study on unraveling juvenile delinquency, done by the Glukes, Sheldon and Elderglup, cost about $500,000. 10-year study, just published this year. They matched 500 boys, 500 delinquent, 500 non-delinquent. High IQ, low IQ, low IQ, Greek background, Hill District, kept on, matched 500 group. And then they studied each group. And you know, the delinquent boy came out pretty good. He was likable. For you PFI, physical education, muscle testers, he had a stronger right grip, left grip, back grip. He was never moody, was illless, was skilled. He wore his heart on his sleeve. He liked people. People liked him. But he lacked 2 things. One, he had become a rebel in the home. And they did not necessarily come from broken homes, in the sense you think broken. But they came from homes where the tie had been broken between themselves and their parents. Parents living. That was one. The second characteristic was that those young people had not mastered hobby skills. And they were out for their thrills. Well, I think it's tremendously important to have a father go out with his boy, mother and daughter, and hundreds of times these little children at 2, 3, and 4 come into the kitchen. Mommy, can I help? Mommy, can I help? Daddy, can I help? Daddy, can I help? What's the answer? No, not now, tomorrow, some other day, too hot, too cold, too big, too little, too sharp, too dull, too this, no, bother me now, some other time. And you put that off about 3 or 4 years and they won't come anymore. And then you've lost your contact completely. Now, I think skills also, and my final point is this. I think your skills also give you a sense, give the individual a sense to belong, a sense of achievement, a sense of being needed. I think it's the one way we're going to get ourselves over this problem of minority groups, many racial conflicts, some of our problems of real delinquency, and some of the problems of our handicap. I was up in our own clinic the other day, where I work with Dr. Rusk a great deal. A little girl we've been working with there for how many months. I came in, and she said, I went to the bathroom, closed the door, all alone. And I looked down, and the braces on her feet were bare. She had never gone in alone to close a door. She said, oh, My, she said, I'm just getting so much better. And I looked at her fingernails and I said, Susan, your fingernails are so clean. I brushed them. One hand's gone entirely. And I said, how in the world did you brush them with one hand? She said, I had a vacuum cup on the back of my brush and I put it on the wall and I brushed my own fingernails. Well, it was the same as the girl that had written a piece of poetry and gotten a book accepted or done a great piece of music in Carnegie Hall that she achieved and proud of herself. And she'll go on and she'll go on and she'll go on and she may be Helen Keller. Nobody knows. But you've got to have it. 2 years ago this spring, 3 years. April. I was in Atlanta. My good friend Chuck McDonald said, you want to see a baseball game? I said, no, not particularly today. Well, he said, we're going to have something rather unique. It's the first time in the history of the South that a Negro boy is going to play against an all-white team. Better come along. I said, I guess I will. We got in there, and that place was crowded. Every law enforcement officer for 100 miles was in Atlanta. There were boos and catcalls. I remember the game very well. I remember who got on base, Pee Wee Reese. I remember who got a hit right after him. I remember a man struck out. Then the young fellow with a watermelon smile, you got to walk clear around the back of him to see the ends of it. Walked out to home plate. He took off his hat, bowed to the white group. Not a sound. Bowed to the Negro group, and of course he got a good wild applause. Straightened himself, he pulled his cap down, yanked up his trousers like he always does. Stood there. First ball across that plate, he smacked it over against the left field bleachers for two-bagger, and two men came in. That entire audience, black and white, rose and cheered Jackie Robinson for 5 minutes. On the way out, I said to the sheriff, whom I had been introduced to going in, how goes it? He said, I sent every law enforcement man home an hour ago. We've got nobody but the guards and the caretakers of the park. Tension's all over. Why? Because it was recognized as somebody who belonged, because he achieved, because he had a skill, because he wanted. And not only he belonged, but his people belonged. If we can get enough of those places where you belong. If someone came along tomorrow and told us they had an immunizing fluid serum for polio, would you ask who his grandfather was? Would you ask whether he came from Japan or China or Russia or Iran or Iraq, or whether he was a Jew or a Protestant or a Catholic or a Jehovah's Witness or whatnot? Would you ask any questions at all? No. You just throw your arms around him and say, thank God. And then afterwards you might ask where he came from. But you don't care. As long as they can achieve, as long as they've got the skill, as long as they have that thing that makes them belong to the human race. And that's skill. Oh, I must stop. I'm going to read you something. Then I will stop. End of a half hour, but it's too late. I want to read you something. It came out. I just want to show you nothing's new. This was published 60 years ago in the Journal of Education in Australia. Nothing good could certainly come out of Australia. And anything 60 years old certainly isn't worth reading. But I'm going to read this to you. I was one of a company of 150 students who had just closed their college life. Some with honors and not a few without. Before separating to go into the world, never to meet again, we called a formal dinner and invited one of our professors who had never made a speech to come and meet with us. And to our utter consternation, he came. He said, after some preliminary remarks, we are in one of the great banquet halls of the world. Belshazzar's hall, compared with this, was a lodging the third floor back. No such art existed in those days as we see in this room. No such vines graced his board. They were elegant for their day, but this is another day. From the four corners of the earth come the things on this table. We have here samples of 100 forms of human worship. Take this tablecloth. It is of exquisite workmanship, involves weaving, back bleaching, smoothing, designing, dazzling, beautiful, pleasing to the eye. I want to ask you a question, gentlemen. Is there anyone in this room who's ever had any experience with the weaving of cloth? There was absolute silence. I understand then it's beyond your kin. And maybe I'll send into the pottery. Surely the men and the women who produce beautiful things are artists. What a joy it must be for a man to hold a thing in his hand and say, I've made that. Many forms of labor involved. Digging the clay, carting, fashioning, painting, burning, baking, finishing. Is there any man in this room who's ever done anything in that field? There are samples of most exquisite, and I know costly glass. This also involves labor, quite a unique industry. I will not detail the process. Then he went over the silver, dwelt on the life of the miner and mines, the drapery at the windows, the mural decorations executed by the great living artists of the day. Rich fresco around the room. He called attention to it. Went over everything in detail, one by one. And then the cut flowers. Ask them if they knew anything about the classification of the flowers after the men had taken 4 years of botany. Said he, I'm a representative university man, seriously asking myself the question whether or not the thing we call education educates. Silence had become impressive. Perhaps I should put you at ease by saying I do not know these two things, but that's no excuse. A timekeeper performs a useful function, so does a cash register. But the function of education is not to turn out timekeepers and cash registers. The function of a college education is to turn out leaders of men. You are certainly not to blame. You are a victim of whatever system we have. I cannot say I'm blameless. I do not believe that a smattering of languages, mathematics, and history is education. I believe the system of cramming these things to pass an examination is pernicious. So having been asked for the first time in my life to express myself, I've done so. Education is to prepare and equip for the duties and responsibilities of life, not to turn out industrial and commercial bosses, gaffers, timekeepers, and cash registers. I could hardly be justified in taking up your time with these observations if this was not so. So in addition, I want to say this. Most of you are destined to be teachers, leaders, masters of men. You will organize and mobilize these people. You will oversee it and direct it. When you see around you men who actually create beautiful things with their hands, I want you to remember that it was my opinion that actual labor in the arts and crafts and industry is infinitely more nobler contribution to the happiness of man than many of the things that you'll be doing. It will not come in our day maybe, but it will come when the training of the hand will rank as important as the training of what these people call the mind. Why should it be considered unthinkable for a blacksmith or a carpenter that he should need an education? Why should college men consider it degrading to handle tools and make useful and beautiful things? Why should a university perpetuate such a revolt against nature as a system in which man who does useful work is called a gentleman, while the creator of wealth and beautiful things is called low caste? I want to point out to you that the highest form of culture and refinement known to mankind was ultimately associated with labor. In order to do that, I want to present you a picture, said he. In order to do so, he walked back, pushed his chair back, stood a few feet from the table, his face bowed deep emotion. Voice became wonderfully soft, irresistibly spellbinding. College men who had been interested now were spellbound. So he raised his hand and drew aside in pantomime a great curtain behind him. Gentlemen, said he, may I introduce you to a young Galilean?
who is a master builder, Jesus of Nazareth. It was a weird act. Silence was oppressive. And as if addressing an actual person in flesh and blood, he said, Master, may I ask you the question I have asked these young men, whether there's anything in this room that you could have made with your hands? There was a pause. But with a slow, measured tread of an Oriental, he walked to the other end of the table, took the tablecloth, laid bare the great oak leg of the table. In that position, he looked into the faces of men and said, the master says, yes, I could have made that table. I was a carpenter.